Hunters claim to have seen two Bigfoot fighting in the woods. That's reportedly what happened to a couple of hunters in Michigan, one of whom is a bow hunter named Mark, who recently shared their scary Bigfoot story with the Sasquatch Chronicles podcast. The thing was huge. Mark recalled. I'm talking massive. And it was right next to one of the railroad signs, and the railroad signs were 10 feet high, and its head probably stood a good half foot over the sign. When his friend shines a flashlight on one of the creatures, he says, "It's not a bear, because we know what bears look like." He shined it on whatever it was, and the thing just sucked it up like it was a sponge. You could see the silhouette of it, but the hair on this thing just sucked it up. The hand on this thing was fucking huge. Shaquille O'Neal is a big man, but this thing dwarfed him. It could have pawned a beach ball. We could see him really well. He had big legs, big hips, his chest kind of tapered up. He had a round head. The arms were very long. Off to the right of us, towards the river, which was south of us, we heard something else making some crazy noises. That one started coming towards us, and all hell broke loose. Something was going down there, fighting, and I mean, it sounded like two T-Rexes going at it. Branches were snapping, you could hear hollering and growling. A couple of seconds later, you could hear something running off, and it jumped into the river, then everything got quiet. When everything finally calmed down and the Bigfoot creatures had moved on, Mark says, and we're still sitting up there shaking and it's still dark. We sat there for like 15 to 20 minutes sitting there. Then we had enough nerve to get down to the truck and we got the hell out of there. Terror in the woods. Another early report was uncovered by cryptozoologist Loren Coleman. The report comes from an article called Terror in the Woods, which appeared in the November 27, 1895 edition of the San Francisco newspaper The Call, and is a rather dramatic, violent account of several lumbermen who either went missing or were killed in a shockingly brutal manner by some wild beast in Northern California. The story goes that in November of 1895, a lumberman came out of the wilderness, telling stories of missing men and a hairy wild man running amok. A lumberman who returned today from the forest in the state's north brings the most harrowing intelligence of a wild man's activities in the West Branch lumber region. He states that great consternation has been caused and a large number of lumbermen have left the camps and returned to their cities rather than face the monster. For over 2 months, quite a number of men have disappeared from the camps and when found bore the semblance of having had an encounter with some wild animal, their bodies in every instance having been terribly mangled and torn. A lumberman who returned to a camp a little north of this city a week ago startled all by stating that while at work he had been attacked by this wild man, and it was only with the help of his axe that he had been able to defend himself from the murderous attacks. Since that time, he has been seen by the crew several times, but on their approach, he fled into the deep woods at the speed of a deer. He is described as being so much like an animal that it is almost impossible to tell him from one. He has a long, shaggy beard and is covered with a huge skin coat. The general belief is that he is a sportsman who has become lost in the deep forests, and after wandering around for weeks, has gone hopelessly crazy, and already there have been over half a dozen instances of a similar character in the state, growled like a mad dog. A very bizarre story. A recent report of an alleged attack happened in 1965 in Monroe County, Michigan when a 17-year-old named Christina Van Acker was driving home one evening with her mother. As they drove, they reported a loud thud that reverberated through the car and shook the vehicle. They thought they had hit an animal or a person, so they stopped the car to take a look. According to the report, as soon as Christina rolled the window down, a massive arm covered in black hair reached in through the window, grabbed her head, and then smashed it against the car door so hard that she was rendered unconscious. It is unclear just how much it had been prepared to push through this attack, as Christina's mother's screams seemed to have startled it and sent it running off into the woods. The mother would claim that it was a hair-covered, ape-like beast around 7 feet tall, which had growled like a mad dog. Farmhouse. Still more recent is a somewhat well-known case that happened in 2000 in a rural part of Honobia, Oklahoma. The witness, known only as Mike, supposedly bought a farm there with his family, and several months after moving in, strange things began to happen. One evening, Mike claims that they started to hear loud bangs on the front door or even the sides of the house, and in the ensuing days, he claimed that he had seen a shadowy figure that stood 8 feet tall lurking about the property. After this, things got more harrowing when 30 chickens went missing from the chicken coop and a load of deer meat was stolen from the shed, which had had the door completely ripped off. Furthermore, unearthly and deafening shrieking wails were heard booming out of the forest at night on several occasions. Mike asked his brother Tim for help, and the two men decided to try and set up a stakeout to shoot the intruder with rifles. After several nights of staying awake in the dark with their rifles held close, a man-like hairy face reportedly bloomed out of the darkness at the window to peer in and growl menacingly, after which the two brothers fired at it to send it fleeing. As the two men ran out onto the porch to pursue it, they saw it fall to the ground, apparently dead, and 3 more of the massive beasts allegedly materialized from the trees to carry away the carcass. The next evening, they apparently came back for revenge, as the brothers reported having their house assaulted by the creatures, which hurled stones, punched walls, and violently rattled doors and windows, all the while howling in anger, and such attacks would persist until the family decided to move away. The incident has been commonly called the Siege of Honobia, and has several of the hallmarks of Beck's Ape Canyon encounter, such as the dead Bigfoot inciting fierce vengeance and the attack on the home by several of the creatures who seem to have really wanted to get in. One wonders what would have happened if they had actually succeeded. Texas woods. Most recent of all is an alleged scary encounter with Sasquatch that happened as recently as 2015 in the East Texas Piney Woods, within the Sam Houston National Forest, near Houston, Texas. According to Bigfoot researcher Wes Germer, he had ventured into the area along with guides Bob Garrett and Sons in order to look for the elusive creatures, and that evening they were spooked by a large, hairy bipedal creature of some sort, which exuded power and possessed great speed. Germer would say, "We hear this thing crash through the brush. And then we hear this thing start crashing. Just crash. 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 And you can hear it walking and you can hear it breaking branches as it's going. This thing moved so fast, it probably covered 100 or 150 yards like nothing." Germer and some of the other men went to investigate, armed with rifles, but they could not get a good view of it because the trees were so dense. They could hear it out there moving around, however, and they could hear its breathing as well, and they estimated that it was only around 30 or 40 feet away from their position. They crept in closer to it, and that was when things got intense rather quickly when they heard a sound like something whirling through the air, like helicopter blades. Germer would say, "And I knew what it was. It was a log coming, and it was a big log, and you could hear it being thrown. And I ducked down because I thought for sure it was going to hit one of us in the head. But it hit a tree right in front of us, and I just couldn't believe that was happening. I knew what just threw that log at us." The mysterious creature would continue to hurl logs and pieces of broken trees at them sporadically during their excursion, none of which ever hit their mark, leaving them to speculate if it was really trying to harm them or simply scare them off. Germer would say that on a different excursion, he and his son had been assaulted by a barrage of logs that was so intense that they had been forced to cower in their truck. If these reports are true, then it would seem that something incredibly powerful must be at the source of these outbursts, and it fits in with the numerous reports of Bigfoot hurling boulders, rocks, and other heavy objects in an effort to frighten or possibly even kill. War with humans. The very bizarre account begins in 1855, in the region of the present U.S. states of Oklahoma and Arkansas, where the once mighty Choctaw Nation of Native Americans once ruled over all they saw. This year, there was a visible scourge of unseen bandits emerging from the wilderness to steal vegetables and even livestock. This might have been the end of it if not for the claim that the trespassers are said to have soon graduated to kidnapping people, mostly children, which provoked a fierce reaction in the tribe. A search party was allegedly formed, composed of a group of uncommonly large cavalry warriors called the Light Horsemen, the largest of whom was the towering Hamas Tubby and his 6 sons, who were widely reported as standing at around 7 feet or more in height. These real giants, along with a contingent of 30 other very large and fierce horseback riders, headed out led by a part French, part Choctaw general by the name of Joshua Lafleur, and their mission was to find the culprits and put an end to their reign. As they headed out into the wilderness in the early morning hours from the tribal capital in Tusculoma, fully armed with high-powered rifles and pistols and thirsty for vengeance, these menacing, proud warriors no doubt thought that this would be a simple matter of rounding some ragtag group of bandits, but they were in for quite a bizarre surprise, to say the least. The group of warriors penetrated deep into the region which is now known as the McCurtain County Wilderness area of present-day Oklahoma, and after 8 hours of riding non-stop through the blazing June sun, they stopped at a spot near the Clover River to rest and eat, before remounting and continuing on the last leg of their tiring journey. It was after nearly 14 hours of almost non-stop riding that the men reached the area where the bandits were said to be most active, and it was here that Lafleur suddenly gave the order to halt as if he had seen something that had caught his attention. Using a crude telescope, Lafleur peered off into the distance as the men rumbled amongst themselves, and the horses huffed and chuffed. The general claimed that he could see something moving about ahead and voiced his confidence that it was the enemy before putting the telescope aside and giving the warriors the order to charge. The massive, bloodthirsty warriors must have been quite a sight as they howled and rushed their horses through the trees in a mad dash into battle, weapons drawn and ready to fight. Yet their powerful drive forward was soon brought to a halt when the unbearable stench of decay hit them like a wall and their steeds began to inexplicably buck and rear in an abrupt, profound panic, knocking several of them to the mossy ground to writhe around hacking and coughing, such as the intensity of the supposed olfactory assault. Some of the warriors, including the Tubbies and Lafleur himself, were allegedly able to control their animals and advance past this nauseating wave of rotting stink to rush towards the bandits, and as they exploded out into a forest clearing, the source of the Stygian stench was clear. There in the center of the clearing, they found what was described as some sort of earthen mound that had embedded within it and strewn about it numerous corpses in varying levels of decomposition, drawing a fog of flies that droned all about the startled warriors. Of human bandits, there was no sign, but looming nearby were 3 enormous, ape-like creatures covered with hair, so tall as to dwarf even the most statuesque of the Tubbies themselves. These beast-men purportedly stood there glaring in their direction, completely unafraid of the tribal warriors. What purportedly followed next was just as dramatic and over-the-top as any action movie. Lafleur is said to have charged the strange beasts without hesitation, pistol and saber in hand and howling the whole time. One of the creatures stepped forward and lashed out with a massive hand to swat the general's horse to the side of its head with a thunderous blow that sent it sprawling to the ground dead. Lafleur was ejected to the ground but was soon on his feet with his pistol blazing, managing to hit the wildman several times but barely slowing it down at all. Even after sustaining several gunshot wounds, it barely bled at all, seemed to have not even felt it, and lunged forward to grab the man by the head and rip it clean off. All of this had happened before the others had even had any time to react, nor indeed even process the situation at all, and they had witnessed it in a wide-eyed stupor. Upon seeing their general slump to the ground without a head as this vicious ape creature loomed over his carcass, they produced their rifles and launched a withering volley of bullets at the monsters, which managed to drop all but one of them. The grievously injured creature purportedly limped off in a bid to escape but was set upon by one of the Tubby brothers, who pounced and apparently cut its head off with his hunting knife. In the aftermath, it was just a few scattered native warriors, poised and ready for the next attack that would never come, the smell of gun smoke and the fetid stench of dead bodies, feces, and urine lingering all around them. In the background, that Tubby brother crouched over the hulking beast with blood on his knife and hands. The natives then went about the grim work of burying the dead, finding the bodies of at least 19 children among them, and the bodies of the hulking beasts were burned on a bonfire, Bigfoot vs. the U.S. Army. Brown's Guide to Georgia has published a report regarding a pair of alleged encounters between U.S. troops and Bigfoot. Fort Stewart, near Savannah, Georgia, is surrounded by swamps and piney woods, providing ideal cover for a lurking hairy hominid. In December of 1995, a sergeant known only as R.B. was training in a remote area with 2 other infantry squad leaders and 2 privates. Their assignment was to reconnoiter another unit located several miles away. To avoid detection in the growing darkness, the men waded into chest-deep swamp water for several hundred yards, guided by a map and compass. After leaving the swamp, Sergeant R.B. noticed that for the next 15 minutes, a shadow would approach within 25 yards of the team, but just when they expected to catch sight of their unidentified pursuer, it would break off. In an effort to elude whatever was trailing them, Sergeant R.B., another sergeant, and a private halted while the other 2 men continued. 5 minutes later, the other soldiers followed, but the mystery creature was not fooled. Sergeant R.B. wrote, "We could hear something or someone following us. It would go around us, fade off, and then we would hear it coming again. It started weaving in and out of the 2 groups like a figure 8. It came between the 2 groups, around them, toward us, as it knew exactly where we were even though we couldn't see it. When the reunited team was 400 meters from the opposing unit, they established a patrol base. Sergeant R.B. and another sergeant would reconnoiter their objective, then return in 2 hours, when a second pair would start out. After covering 200 meters, the men heard their nemesis again. They crossed an open area, then fell to the ground, watching their rear. After 5 minutes, they heard a scream roar. Sergeant R.B. recorded. This is when it got really weird. A minute later, it screamed again, and then we heard what sounded like a huge rotten tree falling and breaking. That was the last we heard and the last I wanted to hear." The second notable encounter occurred at 2 a.m. on November 12, 1998. Barry was a gunner on an armored tracked vehicle that was maneuvering on dirt tank trails in the swampy northeast portion of Fort Stewart. Barry was scanning for simulated targets through a thermal sight while the driver was driving using a night vision device. At one intersection, Barry scanned the track and observed something come out of the vegetation 50 yards away, entering the brush on the opposite side. It crossed the 15 to 20 foot wide lane in 3 easy strides. The creature ignored the approaching tank, keeping its head and torso looking straight ahead. Barry, who had been trained with night vision equipment, estimated the creature's height to be 8 feet tall. He also concluded that this hairy entity was unclothed due to the fact that it appeared through the thermal sight to be one constant color from head to foot. Barry had watched documentaries and read books about Bigfoot as a kid, and he immediately thought this was one. Though Bradley's internal communication system reported the sighting, the spooked commander ordered the driver to punch it and the vehicle quickly exited the area. Barry's story swiftly spread through the camp, with the soldier taking some heavy ribbing over seeing Bigfoot. Later, another soldier approached and confided that his father, while stationed at Fort Stewart in the 1960s, had seen an identical unclassified animal in that area.